Authorities have also confirmed that as a result of the emergency powers that are now in force, all media outlets will be closely monitored. Following a meeting late yesterday of all news editors, the Department of Information has directed that as of now, ministry officials and police will be posted to all news outlets to monitor their operations.
Hello and welcome to Media 7. That was the news that greeted Fijian TV viewers on Saturday. While it was delivered, Fiji's so-called khaki editors, uniformed soldiers in the control room, kept watch. The main 6 o'clock bulletin was then not allowed to air and a reporter was detained. We'll be looking at the Pacific Nation's extraordinary new purge on the news media in this program. But first, Simon Pound looks at what happened.
April has seen a fresh round of upheaval in Fiji. The Fijian Appeal Court declared Commodore Frank Bainimarama's interim government illegal and unconstitutional. President Josefa Iliolo then abrogated the constitution, sacked the judiciary and reinstated Bainimarama.
I appoint myself as the head of the state of Fiji under a new legal order.
Is this more of the same from the coup-prone nation or a concerning turn of events? It is different in that a state of emergency has been called. Dissidents can now be held for up to 2 years without charge. A decree has been passed that allows the military the right to bear arms against processions, meetings or assemblies. It also grants soldiers immunity from prosecution if they injure or kill citizens in the process. The military have stepped in and removed the head of the Reserve Bank.
I also want to caution any person who is thinking of interrupting the peace and good governance of our Fiji that no such behaviour shall be tolerated.
And media censorship and control of dissenting voices is in full effect. The military are in newsrooms deciding content and censoring civil and political news. The Fiji Times responded by running blank pages, but this too is falling foul of the regime. On the Daily Post, it's like the upheaval never happened. Perhaps as protest, instead they're running stories about their breakfast. The internet is the only home left for spirited free speech and comment. But there have been reports that the government may seek to limit internet access. So, where now for Fiji? The 2006 coup had widespread support for its intentions, if not its methods. Has it now morphed into something altogether more sinister?
Joining us now to discuss the latest Fijian drama are David Roby, the Director of the Pacific Media Centre at AUT, TVNZ's Pacific correspondent Barbara Drever, and the former publisher of the Fiji Daily Post, Ranjit Singh. Welcome to you all and thank you for joining us. David, you deployed a ringing phrase on your Cafe Pacific blog this week. You said that Fiji has now unashamedly naked military dictatorship back in power. So it's that bad?
Well, I think it is, but really what they've done is completed what they set out to do in December 2006. And then sort of backed away with initial repression and so on. But there's been comparisons made by media freedom organisations and politicians with Burma and Zimbabwe, which I find quite spurious. But I think probably what a better comparison would be with Indonesia under Suharto, where we had the emergence of a military dynasty that lasted a very long time and considerable control over media and freedom of speech. And this is really what we're seeing now.
And you think that's where it's going? You don't place any stock in the promise of an election in 2014?
Oh, I think that could still unfold, but the longer, in the period leading up to that is, I mean, Bainimarama's made it very clear that there's not going to brook any opposition whatsoever. He sees the mission has to be accomplished, and for a coup to succeed, you pull out all stops, and that's what they're doing now.
And yet there still seem to be people inclined to give Bainimarama the benefit of the doubt. On your blog you published an open letter by Crosby Walsh in which he said that the appeal judges who started this current drama should have known what they were doing and by implication shouldn't have applied the law. I find that quite extraordinary.
Yes, that is extraordinary because I mean the rule of law must be carried out. But it's interesting that Bainimarama himself made some comments about the judges and made the point that well, all three judges in the Court of Appeal of Australia, and they had a 52-page judgment which Bainimarama claimed, well, they must have had this judgment lined up beforehand. That's extraordinary as well as a claim. But the point is the rule of law must be followed through, and that was a properly constituted appeal court, and it was a fair judgment.
Barbara, you're in the situation of not being able to go to the place that you're covering because you were rejected last year and you're not allowed back in. How's that affect your job?
Well, let's face it, no one's allowed to go to Fiji at the moment, so I've got in good company. But actually, it's all about context. We've been managing to cover it just fine. It is becoming harder for everybody, but people are still texting me information. I've sources in government as well. Also, we did an interview with Bainimarama this morning. One of the things that you're seeing is there's another form of protest in Fiji at the moment. They're not publishing negative stories, but neither are they publishing positive ones. And that's a form of protest in itself. And so Bainimarama's in the uncomfortable situation of not having a mouthpiece. You know, he's got nowhere to go. And so he's going to the foreign media. So today we had there was a Radio New Zealand had him.
I don't think I've ever heard a more deferential interview than the one Sean Plunkett did with Bainimarama this morning. It's extraordinary. Everyone's tiptoeing around this man like he's an angry toddler.
Yeah, well, he wasn't. He didn't do the interview. Perhaps wasn't as pleasant on at TVNZ. But however, that, you know, the case is that he is now giving media overseas more interviews where he never used to, and it's almost like he's in the uncomfortable position of having to.
That's interesting. Now, you also had some great pictures. You had the pictures of the soldiers in the control room in your report, which was a compelling image. How did you get those?
Look, we've got a great arrangement with Fiji TV, and it's been built up with relationships. I've trained some of their staff, and we have an arrangement where they come to us, and you know, it's a great relationship. We're great mates as well. And one of the things that they do is they give us footage, we give them footage, and we asked for the footage that they filmed, and they, as a matter of course, sent it to us. And the person, of course, who was responsible went to jail for it for 2 nights. They also took in the technician who pushed the button to send it to us. And that is how bad things have got.
So Bainimarama was being disingenuous when he told Sean Plunkett that, as far as he knew, no one was in jail.
It's just rubbish. He was absolutely in jail. I talked to the lad this morning, and he's doing well, but he's been told that he's not allowed, but he's been told by the military he's not allowed to go back to work. So, you know, not only has he been locked up for 2 nights in appalling conditions in a police cell, he can't go back to work.
Now, Ranjit, could this have been avoided?
Yes, if you will recall, on 20th December 2006, perhaps just 2 weeks after Bainimarama took charge, there was a panel discussion held in Sandringham, and I was one of the speakers there. And subsequent to that, I did write an opinion piece, and in that I enumerated why I was, while staying in a democratic country, was standing accused of supporting something that was undemocratic. Well, my rationale was that any democracy which is unable to guarantee equality and social justice to all its people is not worth defending. And you are hearing it from the horse's mouth, because I am one of those part of the Indo-Fijian population who have been at the receiving end of Garase's racist regime under a supposedly democratic system.
But was there anything that happened under Ngarase that it is worse than what's happening now? Because it seems like Fiji is looking into the abyss.
Unfortunately, what has just happened within the last few weeks has saddened me as well. As somebody who was sympathetic to the process of cleanup that was waged in Fiji, I sort of supported it. But now, after seeing what is meted out to my fellow journalists, I feel very saddened. I don't think anybody is justified in shooting the messengers. despite all the bad conditions, our people in Fiji, our journalists, they are doing a remarkable job. And no regime in the world ever won by shooting the messengers. So I think by doing what is happening in Fiji, perhaps the interim regime might be shooting in its own feet.
And David, Barbara's already intimated that that may be the case. They've come down so hard on the media that they now have no outlet to actually say what they want to say. Why did they come down so hard on the media this time?
Well, I think they've wanted to move against the media for quite a long time, and you saw last year there were first of all the expulsion of two publishers, the Fiji Sun originally, and then the Fiji Times, and then the second publisher of the Fiji Times earlier this year. There was the contempt case against the Fiji Times. They've been gunning for the Fiji Times in particular for a long time, but also Fiji Television, because they're the two trendsetters and the main media organisations in the country. And there's been a belief for a very long time that the Fiji Times is sort of seen as being expatriate interests because it's owned by Murdoch. I think it's quite wrong, the perception, but that's been a very widespread belief, and the military have clung to that. So shut up the Fiji Times, and to a lesser extent Fiji TV. They believe that they can get somewhere. So they've been waiting for that sort of excuse. And it's tragic, really, because I think the media in Fiji have done an extraordinary job in very, very difficult circumstances for a long time. Where else would you be covering 4 coups in 20 years, in this part of the world anyway? And journalists are very courageous, and it's a pity that the regime hasn't actually given credit where credit's due with the Fiji media.
Now, you'll know as well as anyone that the blogs have been extremely lively. It's been quite exciting reading them. Without dropping anyone in it, what kinds of people are writing these?
Well, there are quite a few actually done by journalists, and there have been some new ones that have started this week, and there are journalists all behind them as well. And it's symptomatic of the frustrations in the media itself, that there are some things you simply can't address now within the local media, and so the blogs are the way to go.
And Barbara, you'll still be getting it, even if they do manage to shut down the internet, which there's been talk of.
Well, I've heard that some of the internet cafes today have been shut down, and of course Radio Australia's 2 transmitters, FM transmitters, were ordered to be shut down today. So Radio Australia is now only broadcasting shortwave in Fiji.
Do you hold out much hope that Bainimarama said this week that if things have stabilised within 30 days, he will lift these restrictions on the media? I kind of doubt it'll ever go back to where it was. No,
I kind of doubt that too. It really, the thing that you've got to watch now in Fiji is that with the economy being so terrible, you know, people are going to, the state civil servants are about to get huge pay cuts. That's going to go through shortly. The inflation's about to shoot through the roof, and people actually can't afford to put food on the table. So there's quite a lot of public discontent at the moment, and that's one thing that Bainimarama is going to have to watch, and that's one of the reasons why there is no media negative stories, and it's just not going to work. There are plans afoot. This is not going to be an easy ride for him. But no, I absolutely believe that he will not lift that state of emergency in the short term.
Ranjit, what's your feel for what the mood of the public is in Fiji at the moment? It seems, although people may be unhappy with it, that things are relatively calm there at the moment.
Yes, I've been talking to people in Fiji, and there is no more shock treatment left for them. I mean, we have had so many situations like that this is just like another cyclone rising, and it will subside, and they'll say we'll go back to our normal. You'll recall when Rambuka did this, the New Zealand government and other international communities did object to it, but after a while they could not completely ignore Fiji as a country. And perhaps that's the mood in Fiji, that they think that international community just cannot discard one of their loved children, which is Fiji, forever. But I feel the Western, especially New Zealand media, there has been too much emphasis on reporting what has gone wrong. Perhaps we need to pinpoint what these countries or the international community did in the last 2 years to ensure that Fiji does not go to a situation where now it is been likened to Burma. In fact, in my article 2 years ago, and in some of the perspective articles that appeared in New Zealand Herald, I have virtually pleaded to Australia and New Zealand, please do not kick Fiji in the teeth, understand our fundamental problems. We are at a very different stage of development. We are not as developed as New Zealand and Australia and other people who are trying to impose the first world solution to a third world problem.
It still sounds to me a little bit like making excuses, and I would have to say the same to you, David. At times you have blamed the Australian and New Zealand governments. I wonder whether we're at a point now where we have to stop. We actually have to lay the blame on the people who are doing it.
I think we've seen the results of Australian and New Zealand policy in particular. You know, the failure of the policies for the last 2 years has actually driven to this point. The catalyst, of course, was the appeal court judgment, but it's been the culmination of the failed policies. But quite what happens now. It's actually very, very complex and very, very difficult.
You know, a lot of it is nothing to do with New Zealand, Australia, though. Although I'd take David's point and think you're quite right on that. But you have to look at Bainimarama's own position, and it has been deteriorating within his own military camp. And that is a part of what's happened. This is behind what this catalyst, as well as the appeal court decision, the actions that were taken. He's protecting his turf at the moment.
And the big danger here is, and I think this is far more harrowing than what we're facing at the moment, is this is probably the most powerful military force, and certainly in the region. And if there is a counter coup, and a counter coup would only come from within the military, we would have a very bloody affair, and it's pretty daunting.
It is a horrifying thing, and people are already talking about it. So,
is there any cause for optimism, just before we finish? Is there any cause for optimism in Fiji? Because we've had a pretty gloomy discussion here.
Well, I think the Fiji people are incredibly resilient. And it's another point I'd like to make about the media's role in this, because they've already shown, you know, their response to censorship and the blank spaces and the, you know, socking it to them in effect. With the regime, and we've seen the you know, spoof stories in the Daily Post, for example, you know, turning a joke into this situation. But I think that the Fiji journalists are very creative. They'll find ways to influence progress, and also I think that the people themselves are incredibly resilient, and I think optimism will come through in the end.
I can't tell you how proud I am of my colleagues up there. I mean, you know, my colleagues and friends, they're just fabulous people, and they're doing their job under such terrible circumstances. You know, they call me at night and say, what do we do? What do we do? And we talk things over, and I can offer very little, and in the end they just do what they have to do. They do their job, and you've got to take your hat off to them. And
I also have to say, just in conclusion, I deeply admire the humour deployed by the Fiji Daily Post staff today. That was remarkable. Island humour. Well, that concludes this discussion, but not, I suspect, the wider debate. Thank you to our panellists, David Roby, Barbara Drever and Ranjit Singh. We'll be back after the break with a new topic and a new panel, with the green message in Straitened Times.